Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. There are no traffic jams along the extra mile when you're studying for your bar exam. And now, your host, Jackson Mummy, owner of the Celebration Bar Review.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. This is your host, Jackson Mummy. I imagine it's been quite a week for you. It certainly has been for us. We decided to title this week's episode Bar Mountain Railroad because it feels like we're on a roller coaster, doesn't it? In today's episode, we're going to share with you a video that our senior editor and mentor, Megan Saya, recorded with me, bringing everyone up to date on what's going on with the bar exams, the various options that are being presented by the National Conference of Bar Examiners, some of the state bar exams like New York. We're going to give you our insight and views about that. We wanted to get this episode out early so that it would be timely for those of you trying to decide what to do. I also wanted to let you know that we've prepared an all-new, from the ground up webinar. It's titled, Now is the Best Time to Take the Bar Exam, Why You Should Ignore the Crowd and the Fear. This is a look at the strategy that we are suggesting to students to prepare for exams, whether it's July or the fall or whenever the next bar exam is being given. Now, we've gotten an enormous response to this webinar, and we're doing it multiple times a week. And I'm doing a live Q&A in addition to that at the end of the webinar to answer any questions that have come up, anything that has happened in the last few minutes even, to try and address that. The webinar is less than an hour in length, and it's completely free. And you can register by going to celebrationbarreview.com/now. Or there's a button right in the show notes, and you can link to that and register and pick the presentation that works best for you. And if you're unable to attend any of the dates and times that we've done, and we've tried to create a fair number of them, but if you're unable to attend, still go ahead and register. We'll send a copy of the recording to everyone that registers. It's really incredibly timely information and important information for you to have if you're looking at taking the bar exam. So don't want you to miss out on that. Go to celebrationbarreview.com/now, and you can register for this webinar. Now is the best time to take the bar exam. So I hope that everyone will do that. Now, before we jump into the information about COVID-19 and how it's impacting the bar exam, I wanted to share with you very briefly a comment that I got just a couple of days ago. Our podcast is obviously heard and watched around the world, and I got a very interesting email the other day from someone that I've never met or spoken to. His name is Terry, and Terry says, I'm writing to you from Australia, fresh from sitting the New South Wales bar exam. Okay. He said, I'm pleased to tell you that I passed on my second go. I was looking at my diary tonight and had notes about the fear and judgment around taking the exam from listening to your podcast. And that was an earlier episode, I think a week or two ago. It was great information. It helped me to be on point in preparing for my exams. What you said about it being a privilege to even be able to sit the exam is true and effective. So you helped me prepare and pass. And I wish you the best as I'm considering what to do now, as the New South Wales bar is a competitive and dicey area to work in the best of times, but with COVID-19 wreaking havoc here and around the world, my senior public service role, which allows me to work from home, is looking pretty good. Cheers from Australia, Terry. Well, congratulations, Terry, on passing your bar. You know, we're obviously not preparing students for the New South Wales bar, but I'm glad that the information that we give here is helpful. And I think it has certainly universal application when we talk about things like fear and preparation and focus. And in today's message, what Megan and I are doing is not only talking about the news of the day, but also how we think bar takers should respond to it, what they can do practically. I think you're going to find this to be a really illuminating conversation, lots of insights about what's going on, our freshest takes on what's happening. Now, I do have to give you a caveat. By the time you get to this, if you're not watching it or listening on the day that it releases, some of this information may be out of date. It's literally a fast-changing landscape, thus Bar Mountain Railroad. But as of the recording date, it's all accurate, and it's what we know right now. And we'll continue to update that as we go along in further episodes of the podcast. And again, I want to just remind you that the best way to get the most current information is to check out our webinar by going to the button on the show notes. And if you're watching the video, you can watch this video by going to celebrationbarreview.com/297. That's the episode number. If you prefer to listen to the podcast, you can do that on Apple Podcasts, on iHeartRadio, radio.com, Spotify, just about any place the podcasts are syndicated. And you will see a link in the show notes to register for that upcoming webinar. So I don't want to keep you waiting any longer. Let's jump into the conversation that Megan and I had regarding COVID-19 and the bar. We have mostly coronavirus discussion today, not surprisingly, I think. And so we've been gathering some information actually just in the last few minutes before we came on live. So we're going to share with you those updates. Let's go ahead and talk about the updates that have just come in today from the National Conference of Bar Examiners. And June is going to put the link up for their page. But Megan, if you want to just summarize what the conference is saying today, I think that would be helpful.
Sure. Okay. So the NCBE put a note on their coronavirus update page today that said that they are going to make a decision about whether the MBE, MEEs, and MPTs will be, as they called it, deployed. I like that. They will decide by Tuesday, May 5th. So this is really helpful because although we don't know what the decision is going to be, we now have a date where you will know by May 5th whether or not the July exam is going to be happening in July. Okay, so for your own purposes then, I think this is going to be really helpful to do whatever you can do, whatever you need to do between now and then, which obviously depends on, did you take the February exam that you're waiting for results, or have you always been planning on taking the July exam? If you're not waiting on results, keep studying for the July exam. We'll talk more about that. But it's nice to know that May 5th is kind of the, dead drop date of we're going to have some answers by then. So the NCBE will take into account any federal or local or state directives about social distancing, about gatherings. So obviously, if, for instance, California is still under these stay-at-home orders, the bar will not happen in July in California. So they're going to figure this out, and they just wanted to they feel that it's enough time for them to have a better feeling or a better idea of where kind of the direction that things are going by then.
All right, let's stop right there for just 1 minute and just sort of talk about the strategy around that part. I know there's more that they've said. Since we won't know anything until May 5th, so 5 weeks from now, 6 weeks from now, something like that. The big danger in my mind is that people will take their foot off the study accelerator for those 6 weeks, waiting for some decision from the examiners, right? You share that concern?
Yeah, right. That's not a, oh good, I can press pause until May 5th kind of a thing.
Precisely. I think it is more important than ever to put your foot down and go and study as best you can in this 6-week period. Remember that most people outside of this course, most people waiting for a traditional bar review course, are literally just sitting in limbo. They don't know what to do, and they're not going to do anything. This is a time for you to get studies in that reduces the pressure on you later, regardless of what happens. And it gives you, I think, the advantage of having some focus and maybe some control, some sense of control, because you're doing something and not just waiting. I know living in Florida, we wait for hurricanes, and it's the worst feeling in the world. At least you get earthquakes without warning. I don't know if that's better or worse.
No, I prefer the
You like the waiting part? Okay, yeah, you like that better. But the reality of the wait is that it can be just numbing and frustrating and very debilitating, I think, for some people. So I think it's really important that even though we're now hearing this date for the first time today of May 5th, don't be lulled into believing that that means you don't do anything until May 5th. That is not at all what's being said here, and I want to be explicit about that. Please keep moving as though there's going to be a July exam. I'm sure, long before we get to May 5th, we're going to know what the world looks like at that point, and it's going to be pretty obvious what direction they're going. But today, I don't know. And I think it would be a mistake to wait.
Yes, definitely. And then also one other reason why you don't want to wait is because the second part of their announcement today is that they are starting to plan now. They don't know whether they're going to need it, but they're starting to plan now for an extra test administration date. And that's going to be in fall 2020. Now, the big thing with this is they are preparing an entirely new set of materials. So that means MBEs, MEEs, and MPTs. They are not talking about taking July materials and moving them to the fall. They are talking about they're prepping a completely new exam for...
Yeah, let's talk about that again. So there's two different things that are happening here. One is you have 32 states or so that are in the uniform bar exam. They are all taking the same test. Then you have some major jurisdictions like Florida, California, Texas, I don't know, Virginia, a bunch, Michigan, that have their own state-specific exams. So let's just talk about the UBE first. Okay, the UBE jurisdictions. The problem is you can't give the UBE test at the end of July in, let's say, North Dakota and Montana, and then use those same questions a few months later in New York for obvious reasons. So the national conference has a different problem than the bar examiners. Oh, Georgia, that's right. Thanks, Modesto. Sorry, Georgia. It's always Georgia. You can't do that. You can't have the test in these other jurisdictions later, the same materials. But if you're the Florida bar or the Georgia bar or the California bar or the Texas bar, you could theoretically move your state part of the exam and use those same questions you had prepared for July and just give them later because you're not giving them earlier in July. But you can't give the July MBE because that test will have gone into the wild somewhere theoretically in July of 2020. So those states, Florida, for example, would have to use the new MBE. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Right.
The other thing to point out about that, I think, is that what this means is it allows them the opportunity and the option to say, we're going to do the July exam and we're going to do a fall exam. So there is a potential that there will be 3 bar examinations given in 2020. Okay. So we're looking at between 1 and 3 because we know February already happened. So that one's done. There may be just February and July. There may be February, July, and a fall one, or there may only be February. So that's really kind of where we are at this point.
I think that's a good way to, that's a great summation. And if you're in Florida or California or Georgia or Texas, it's possible that you might only have one test, or they may say in California, not going to happen. We're just not going to do it regardless. Or it could be that the UBE jurisdictions will get 3 tests, but the Californian will get 1 and Florida will get 2. I mean, it could be any of those possibilities. Who knows? But so what's the strategy? What are you doing given that situation? You want to talk about that a little bit?
Oh, I mean, I think no matter what, that's why we say, and why we've been saying from the beginning, you have to keep studying now. We just don't know. So there's a potential, even if we start heading into summer and it's looking like, oh gosh, there's no way that the July exam can go off. You want to keep studying. Even if on May 5th, they cancel the July exam, keep studying, because there could be one in, let's say, October. And so or maybe September. I mean, we just don't know what this is going to look like. So you certainly don't want to get caught in the summer finding out, oh, they've just announced a new test date in a couple months and I haven't been studying because I thought I had it until February of 2021 before the next exam. So definitely there's so much uncertainty, but they are clearly the NCBE wants to give the exam. So we know that it's in their best interest to find a solution to give the exam safely. And so I think everyone should be studying with that in mind, that this is not a situation where they're looking for any excuse to cancel. They don't want to cancel. So let's move forward, assuming that they will find a solution, which then we've said this, but if they don't find a solution for 2020, it really doesn't hurt you any to have studied and not been able to take it until 2021. It will hurt you immensely if they do find a solution and you haven't been studying. So that's why I know we're kind of a broken record here, but it's so important to not just sort of give up and press pause, because there's no downside to getting your studies done early. If that's what ends up happening, is that it ends up being early.
Yeah, I would echo what Megan's saying. The worst response you could have to all of this is to stop. That's the big mistake. Everything else can be managed, but stopping is going to be a real problem if you do that. I imagine we will also see some discussion of forum shopping, right? People deciding what jurisdiction they want to sit in. Given the scenario that we just described of 1 exam, 2 exams, or 3 exams, we might see people suddenly slipping in or out of states or the UBE or different states within the UBE to take an exam one place or another. And this could be challenging. I don't know what's going to happen. And I think this is going to be more an issue for people that get results back from February 2020 and fail. I think those are the people who are probably going to be thinking more about, should I look for a fall jurisdiction that I can take rather than a July, because that's a short turnaround time? I don't know. And so I'm just going to invite those of you in our course. We will hold conferences with you. We will help guide you as best we can. We can't tell you what to do, but we can share with you our sense of the exams and try and guide you through that process. As we're talking today, this information from the NCBE just got released a few minutes ago. So that's my first take on it. Maybe I'll have something more profound to say later about it. But I think that right now, I wouldn't be surprised, would you, Megan, if people start thinking about forum shopping?
Yeah, and I do want to share what we were talking about this a few days ago with this event, knowing that this was a possibility that if some jurisdictions held the exam and others didn't. It does raise the question. So this is just to let you guys know we're thinking about these things and we're going to keep our eyes out for them. It does raise the question, if let's say somewhere like Montana says, well, we're able to do it. We're able to keep, it's safe enough to have, let's say, under 100 people in a room. And so we're going to do this and we're able to keep the numbers low. But then suddenly Montana gets flooded with a lot of Western states, right, who end up, driving in or flying in. Suddenly we might end up with a situation where Montana says, never mind, we can't hold it anymore because we just tripled our numbers. And so from what we normally see. So I just want to say that it's something, for you to be aware of. Forum shopping is not necessarily going to be a solution in this situation, and that we're keeping our eyes on it. We're keeping our ears to the ground. And so we'll let you know kind of as we're hearing things and as states are talking through these kinds of issues. And as the NCBE figures out these things, there's a lot of task forces being put together right now for people to try and figure out what is the way that they could do this that's going to make the most sense. And there's going to be not a lot of time for trial and error, right? So we're just trying to think through the potential issues beforehand. And
Right. Well, we're going to talk about New York in a minute because that's one of the task force states. But as we're talking, I'm thinking about Texas, which is doing its last administration of a Texas exam in July of 2020. I actually think Texas might be one of those states that would just say, forget it. We're done. No test in July at all. And they either switch to that fall, if there turns out to be a fall UBE, maybe they just give a fall UBE, or they wait till February 2021 when they're in the UBE. If you're a Texas bar taker, I suppose it raises the question, should I keep studying for the Texas part of the exam? I think the answer is until at least May 5th, you probably do. And I would not, so this is my sense. Don't deviate from the study guide. In other words, don't skip the Texas subjects thinking, well, maybe it won't happen. But having said all that, I still think it's really important that you study for it as though it's going to be there. I think you just have to be proactive about it. And if you didn't study and then they said, hey, we're going to do the test in July 2020, then you're really stuck. And that's what I want to avoid. So that's where it is. Well, let's talk about New York, because New York has been sort of one of the leading edges. Yeah. Obviously, it's a hot spot for the C-19 virus. And it's also a state that has multiple locations, but not anywhere near as many as California to give the exam, and a lot of bar takers. So in New York, can you just summarize a little bit of what they've been talking about doing in New York?
So there have been a lot of different proposals. And New York has put together a task force. So they are trying to decide what makes the most sense. They've talked about a few different things. So I'll kind of run them down and let you, Jackson, sort of explain what these are. So one of the things that have been proposed is a diploma waiver. So would you like to talk about what that is?
Yeah. So for some of you who are old enough to remember, there was a thing in the bar many years ago, about 40 years ago or so, called diploma privilege or diploma waiver. And it meant that if you graduated from law school in a particular state, you could waive into that state's bar without taking the bar exam. Diploma privilege generally only exists anymore in Wisconsin. That's the only state I can think of off the top of my head that still does it. And even they offer a bar exam, but they were the ones that did this initially. One of the things New York is talking about is, do we give diploma privilege on a temporary basis? As I understand it, they would say it's a provisional opportunity for graduates, 3Ls, to practice law between the date of their graduation and the next bar exam. Now, based on today's information, that might be sometime in the fall. Maybe that's February 2021. This provisional work would only be done under the supervision of a member of the bar. And it raises all kinds of questions. You and I were talking about this before we started. You went to University of Virginia Law School, not a bad place, you know. A lot of your classmates a decade ago or so went to New York to practice, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You wouldn't be eligible under the traditional rules of diploma privilege for the New York bar because you didn't go to law school in New York. Mm-hmm. But if you went to Touro, which is it's a good school, but not UVA. Touro's based in New York. Theoretically, you would be given diploma privilege. And that's going to be problematic. I mean, I'm telling you, New York is not a jurisdiction that, I think when they start saying New York law graduates get this, but right. Harvard and UVA and Georgetown and Stanford, they don't get it. That could be a problem.
Especially for people who already have 3Ls who already have jobs in New York City. Mm-hmm.
Right. Another, not the only, but another problem is that people who do provisional work then have to study for the bar while they're working. And that's very different than the traditional 3L that comes out and just studies for 8 weeks and takes the bar exam. And they will discover what many of you in our course already know, which is that's hard to do. Okay. And it takes a lot of work, and you've got to be, in an online world, you can't go sit in a big box bar review. So that's going to be a problem because a lot of those people bought big box bar reviews and they aren't going to be able to sit for 8 weeks to take an exam. It is raft with problems. And if you're already a member of the New York bar, I'm not sure you're wild in this environment about having more competition of people that haven't passed the bar. So I think there's going to be pushback from the existing bar. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, we've already seen some of that.
Yeah. So that's one part of it. Well, go ahead. What else you got?
So another thing,
I could go on, but I think that's enough to give you a sense of it.
Yeah, so they're also considering moving the exam date as well, and they're considering capping the number of takers in a jurisdiction. One of the hard things is that the main center that they give it in Manhattan has been converted into a makeshift hospital. So you're even dealing with, especially in these epicenters in California, in New York, in what's looking to be Florida is starting to rise in the number of cases. You're looking at that a lot of the places where these are held, hotels and things like that, where those are getting turned. I know in California, a lot of hotels are getting turned into hospitals. So they're literally not sure that they're going to have a space. Even if the concern is not the crowd size, they don't know if they're going to have forums for these to be held.
Yeah. And I think there are going to be a lot fewer bar takers in July, no matter what. But you're still talking about 4,000 or 5,000 people, I would guess, in New York, probably a couple thousand in Florida, probably 6,000, 7,000 in California. That's a lot of people when you got to break it down to 250 people or less per site. That's a lot of sites. It's a lot of logistics. It's a lot of proctors. It's a lot of everything. So I think that's going to be a very difficult road for any jurisdiction to go through. So that's another difficulty that exists. One of the other things, and I know we were going to talk about this somewhere, and I'll put it in here. The NCBE talked about enough jurisdictions have to be willing to give the test to equate the scores, right? Was that part of what they're...
Yes. So if you want to explain that for people. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what happens is, in order to get your scaled multi-state score, that's the Scantron sheet. And the national conference gets your results, they scan them in, and then they do a very complex psychometric evaluation of all bar takers nationally, not just the ones in your state. In fact, it's not compared in your state at all. The multi-state is scored on a national basis, and that's necessary in order to equate every administration of the exam back to the original test given in the early 1970s. I explained this in some detail in our course in the Introduction to the MBE, and we also did a podcast about it a couple of episodes ago. In any event, this equating process requires a statistically valid number. In other words, your sample size has to be big enough to be able to measure it. If you only took bar takers in Montana and North Dakota, that isn't going to help you. You've got to have some number. I don't know what that number is, but there are typically 45,000 bar takers in a July bar exam nationally. So if you've only got, let's say, 10,000, is that enough statistically to equate the exam and make the scores dependable? Somewhere there is a number that the NCBE is going to have to figure out, and they're going to have to say, do we have that many bar takers for this administration of the exam? And if they fall short of that number, let's say California, Florida, Texas, New York, Georgia, all say we're not going to do a bar exam in July, I don't think you can reach the threshold, that total number that makes you have a statistically valid reliability of the exam. And therefore, they can't give the multi-state. Now, I want to be clear about this. It doesn't mean you don't study for the multi-state. It doesn't mean that there won't ever be a multi-state. It just means they can't give the multi-state. There's no bar exam, in my view. So these are all factors that are going on behind the scenes and are changing. I mean, 2 weeks ago, this was not on the table at all. So I think it's really important for people to be aware how rapidly this landscape is changing and how many factors play in. I saw an article, and I know you did too, Megan, about some law professors, this may have been the New York thing, saying you don't really need to give a bar exam in July or in 2020. It doesn't really matter. And I thought, really? How naive can these folks be? Law professors have this strange capacity to divorce themselves from reality. They don't practice law. I mean, it's a very nice life that we lead. We don't have to practice law. But people who've just finished law school and have loans to pay and want to be lawyers need to be members of the bar. And I thought it was very, very unhelpful for these law professors to come out and say, oh, it really doesn't matter. Take the bar exam whenever, maybe get rid of the, what? It's crazy stuff, isn't it? I don't know. So there you go.
The last potential option that if you want to talk about is there any way the exam could be given online?
Yeah, that's one of the things they're looking at in New York. You and I talked about this. I think it would be really hard to do. I think it would be exceedingly difficult. The security level that you would need to make that work would be enormous. The NCBE might be able to secure their part of the exam. Maybe you could do the UBE. I don't know. But because each state administers their own test, even if they're doing the UBE, you're now asking these state bar examiners who have no experience in online training or testing to suddenly get super sophisticated in a very short period of time working from home. What are the odds of that, right? I mean, what are the odds that the bar examiners in New Mexico are going to figure out how to give a online test that's completely secured and locked down? It just doesn't seem likely to me. And if that seems like, well, maybe they could do it in New Mexico because they've only got to deal with a couple hundred people, think about New York. How would you handle it with thousands of people? I absolutely can't imagine what that would be. Could a test at some point be given online? Sure, in 5, 6, 10 years, maybe we'll be at that point, but I don't think it's going to happen. And I certainly think a state like Florida would not give the test before they would do it online. Yeah. They're so freaked out about
security. They're very security conscious. Yeah.
I can't, sheriff's officer shows up to watch over your shoulder while you take the test online.
Yeah, they have to go through metal detectors and everything, right? For the regular in the Florida bar. Yeah. I think also the hard thing with the online for right now is that when you think about other, right, like the GMAT is given completely like on a computer, but you still go to a site and take it. And so obviously for the online to be a fix for this, you have to take it at home. And I can't think of any standardized test at this level where they trust you to complete it at home.
And everybody has to take it at the same time.
Right. That's true.
There aren't 10,000 versions of the multi-state.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So it's a real problem. And I think a lot of this is interesting. It certainly forces us as an industry to think about the bar exam maybe differently, and that could be a good thing. Yeah. But I don't see these as solutions. I mean, I see them as distractions. And I think that's where I want to leave that part of the New York discussion now, is that most of this is a distraction. You won't be able to impact it. You won't know what they're going to do yet. And if you get distracted by that at the cost of doing your studying, brokered record time, you are going to be in trouble. You just are. And I know we got questions this week from students that said, I'm so busy watching what's going on here, I just don't feel like I can get my studying done. Then stop watching. Just walk away from it. We'll keep you informed. We'll tell you what's going on, at least as we know it. But just get in and do your work. That's the best advice I think anyone can give you right now.
Yeah, so we had a student question saying, I'm having a really hard time concentrating. Is anybody else having this issue? Yes, everyone in the world is having this issue.
Absolutely. So I did, as I say, that I did that podcast episode about, studying in the face of fear. One of the things I talked about was narrowing your focus. And I think a practical application of that is limit your time watching television or on Twitter or in Facebook dealing with coronavirus news. I know some of you probably are very excited to watch the president every night for multiple hours. Some of you would rather gag than have to turn on that television. Maybe you like Andrew Cuomo's meeting. I don't care. It's all equally unhelpful for you right now. Take the 2 hours you would have watched the press conferences and put them into study time. Turn off your Twitter feed and study. Give yourself a half hour a day to stay current on what's going on the news. But I don't know, have you found people can go down that rabbit hole really quickly and suddenly their half hour turns into 2 hours or 3 hours or 4 hours, and then they're incredibly depressed, as they understandably should be. I read Twitter for 15 minutes and I'm enraged. So I just don't know how you can be doing that. And I think it's one of the things that we can sabotage ourselves with. And of course, meditation, paraliminals are incredibly important, I think, right now, to calm your mind, to focus, and then start your studies. I think calming your mind and not trying to study sort of haphazardly, right? Multitasking. I'm studying while I'm thinking about, all the other things going on, which are understandable. But I think you have to be able to compartmentalize a little bit here so that when you're studying, that's got to be study time for whatever period of time that is, a half hour, an hour, 2 hours, whatever. I had a great conversation with a new student this week who said, I'm really excited about starting to study. It feels like I can control this part of my life. It gives me something to do. It's productive. It's proactive, regardless of when the test is given. And I thought that was the right attitude to take. The alternative is I sit around and I read social media and I become more and more frustrated and upset and scared and frightened. So I hope that helps. I think what we really want to leave you with is the importance of continuing to move forward and studying. We will keep you informed. If something dramatic happens, we'll jump on Facebook Live and do it. I'm struck, Megan, by how much this has changed week to week to week, aren't you?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Which that's what we've kind of been saying from the beginning is like, we just don't know a lot of things because everything is moving very quickly. So, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I want all of you to stay healthy and safe. That is far more important than the bar exam. I don't want anyone to misunderstand that we are trying to take advantage of this situation. We're not, but we recognize that if you have to take the bar, you have to take it, whether it's July or fall or 2021, you have to take it. And our job is to get you ready for that. And so we're standing and staying fully in business and ready to go. I did see a note that one of the big box companies says they're going to try and live stream their lectures starting 7 weeks before the bar exam. And I thought to myself, oh God, what a mess that will be. Does that mean that people in California have to get up early so the people in New York can watch it at their regular time? How do you live stream in 50 states with different state lectures? It's what we talked about earlier. The transition for the traditional bar review into home study is going to be very, very bumpy, I think. And we're so much further ahead because this is what we do all the time. It's literally much less disruptive for you all than it will be for people who thought they were going to go sit in a live classroom, right, for 7 weeks. And so I just want you to be safe and healthy, study at home, do all the right things, take care of your family, take care of yourself, but also move towards your goal of passing the bar exam and to do it with the least amount of disruption possible. So I hope that makes sense to everybody. I hope that you can continue to pursue that. And thanks to all of you guys and everybody on the team here at Celebration. We are very appreciative. Everybody's continuing to function, everyone as well. And, we'll continue on. So all of the regular things that we do are going to happen. So,
yep.
Anything you want to wrap up with?
No, that's it. You guys are doing great, and we're here for you. And yeah, stay safe, stay home and study. Where else? You're not going anywhere, so get that studying in.
All right, that's our episode for this week. I hope that the conversation was helpful to you. I know it probably raises as many questions as it answers. And I think the best way to get some of those answers is to join us on our free training webinar. Again, it's called Now is the Best Time to Take the Bar Exam, Why You Should Ignore the Crowd and the Fear. You can register by clicking on the link in the show notes or by going to celebrationbarreview.com/now. It's completely live. We're going to be demonstrating and showing you the strategy that we think will work. And we're going to be doing a live Q&A as well at the end of each session. So make sure you check that out. We'll look forward to seeing you there and to seeing you next week along the extra mile as we continue down this path.
Thanks for listening to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers at www.celebrationbarreview.com.